you know how when you open VsCode and you create a markdown file, you can just click a preview button and you see your markdown as you're typing it. Same thing with HTML file or whatever. But when you're working on a React component, there is no way to see the React component unless you're just spinning up the entire app.
Welcome to the Startup Stack, where we talk about the tools and tech you can use to build your next startup. Today I had the opportunity to talk to Francois. Francois is the author of a library called Preview.js, which is a tool that lets you preview UI components directly in your IDE. Without further ado, let's do this. Hey, Francois, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
It's exciting to have you. Well, Francois, I wanted to start off by just getting to know you a bit more. I know we've met a few times. What influenced you to get to start working on Preview.js?
One of the things that I realized is that there is no way, like, you know how when you open VsCode and you create a markdown file, you can just click a preview button and you see your markdown as you're typing it. Same thing with HTML file or whatever. But when you're working on a React component, there is no way to see the React component unless you're just spinning up the entire app. So, for example, if you're working on a button that is only appearing in some specific circumstances, you need to open the page and, like, for example, potentially mock out the API to return the specific state that you want in order to see the button in the state that you want. But it wouldn't make much more sense to just be able to visualize that particular component directly in your IDE. And there was one tool that already exists in this space, which is Storybook. And Storybook is excellent. It's a very, very useful tool to document all of your components. So you have to spend a little bit of time creating, like, some stories files for each of your components to describe all the properties that you want to visualize, and then it generates this documentation website, right? But you still need to go through this effort of setting it up and writing all the code, whereas a lot of times you're not even, like, especially if you're looking at a new code base that you just joined a company or something like that, you don't even know where the stories are. You don't know how to see that component. So I started working on this project called Preview.js. Well, back then it was called React Preview because I thought that was only possible with React, but it's now Preview.js because it works with other frameworks as well. And nice. So it's a tool that just does that. So you can click on the code of a component, then it will show you what that component looks like, automatically generating the right props for it.
Very cool. I actually, like, I feel like I can relate to this especially well, just given what I do every day, where, like, I feel like I wish, just like on like the highlight documentation, I can like quickly just make a change and, like, deploy it. It would be so cool if, like, and I guess why I'm especially excited about this is I think, like, there's a future where I'm on just any given web app that maybe I own, and I can just, like, click on a component, edit some props, or, you know what I mean? Basically, kind of on a, like, super narrow level, be able to edit a single page app, you know?
Yep.
And I don't know. The first time I saw this, I was, like, pretty amazed. But yeah, so I guess, Francois, can you maybe walk us through how it works? Do you have, like, a demo up that you could quickly show us?
So let me spin up. Let me share my screen and show you what it looks like. So I have this app that it's a demo app it's a Next.js app called Hungry, and I just basically built it's kind of like Deliveroo or what is that called, Foodora, this kind of stuff. That shows you,
like a Uber Eats kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Uber Eats. That's the one I was looking for. So like the app. So you have you have a list of restaurants, and you can click into a restaurant, and you can see the menu. You can order different things, etc.
Okay.
Right? So this is made of a bunch of components, and if I show you the actual code of it, so you have this. You have this design. Is this big enough? You have this design folder with the restaurant header, restaurant list, restaurant menu, etc. So if let's say I'm just looking at a counter, so that's the counter when you pick a specific item on the menu.
Yeah.
I can look at the code here and I see this thing open counter in Preview.js.
Yeah.
And see if I click on that, it will. This is a bit big. It shows me it's just that component automatically. So this is actually without any configuration, by the way. So if I can change the count and I can change the properties, it automatically detects. It actually looks at the type annotations for your component. In this case, you see props, colon, counter props. It uses the TypeScript compiler APIs, which is basically TypeScript's internal logic to look at the different fields that are available. So if I can actually do, you can see that here I have the autocomplete for the different properties that are there. And,
yeah.
And when I click on various buttons, it actually shows me what callback was invoked of these props.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
I can see the Storybook stories that are associated with it. So here I have in the stories, I have the 0 case and the positive case. So I have these two examples, which are not super impressive. But if I show you, for example, the restaurant list instead, so restaurant list is like that. I can update things like that. So restaurant name. I can say place kitten. I can see different. I can set up different props like this.
You memorized that URL, huh?
Yeah, I did. And then
nice.
You can see the different Storybook stories that are associated with it.
Very cool. Wait, explain to me I don't understand the Storybook story thing, and I'm not honestly. We use Storybook, but I wasn't the one that implemented it. So where do I declare that?
Oh yeah.
What's the mapping between Storybook and Preview.js? How does that work?
So the idea of Storybook is very similar to Preview.js, right? It's about documenting your components, and the thing that Preview.js provides is that if you're not already using Storybook, then it's gonna make your life easier and make it so that you basically perhaps don't even need to create Storybook stories.
Got it.
With Storybook, you have this here. You have this stories file, which is next to the component. And here I'm using the component story format 3, which is the newer Storybook format, where each of these exports here corresponds to one story, so one example of the component.
Got it.
Here I'm providing...
And you basically pin down what props are being provided to a component. Exactly. And then you can edit it accordingly on the given Storybook file or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So if I show you here, sorry, yeah.
No. Go ahead.
So if I show you here, let's say I have this restaurant list, right? If I update this to an empty list, or I do, through it actually lets me see the result of my Storybook story live as I update
Got it.
So. You can add things like that. Which again, if you were using Storybook, you would actually need to first save. So this is updating as you type. Whereas with Storybook, you need to save, spin up Storybook, and open your browser on that, etc., etc.
Makes sense. Yeah. Makes sense. Yes. I'm familiar with that. And some companies don't even have. Some companies I know have Storybook running in CI or something, just because the build process takes forever. And so sometimes you even have to wait for that to happen in CI or something like that.
Yeah. To be fair, Storybook is fixing that. They are improving that quite a bit. Storybook 7, which is in pre-release right now, is based on first is pre-compiled. So instead of having to compile Storybook with Webpack on start, it just spins up immediately. And also you can use Vite with it, which is exactly the same as Preview.js. So it's going to be pretty much exactly as fast as Preview.js.
Nice. I like it. But in any case, this just makes it easier. It almost makes Storybook more accessible. Yep. And for components that you don't necessarily want to standardize yet in your Storybook format or whatever, you can Preview.js them. You're just iterating faster on those types of things. Yeah.
And actually, there's a feature that I've been working for a few months. I still haven't released, but one thing that I think Preview.js could be very useful at is, let's say you don't have restaurant list stories yet, and you open your your restaurant list here, and you have this save button that is going to be there, and that will automatically create a Storybook story based on the props that you have configured. And I think that's going to be a very useful feature, because it just means that you can use the best of both worlds. Like Storybook is extremely good at documentation and as being the source of truth for your designers, but you still need this process for developers to come up with the stories, and that's just a little bit slow unless you have a tool for that.
Nice. I'm becoming more and more convinced that this is now just a way for me to convince our engineering team to start adopting this. Cool. Not that was the intention at all. But cool. Okay, good stuff. I guess tell me, Francois, a little bit about how it's built. So if let's say like if I were trying to do this today, well, first of all, I don't know if I could do this on my own today, but let's say I was able to do it. What my naive approach to it would be, I need to basically somehow parse the user's React tree of components. Some components aren't valid. Some are valid. I would have to come up with some logic to determine what makes a valid component. And then I imagine that it's not as easy to just like get like the props and stuff. Like, as I would think. Like, so, I don't think I can just like do that naively given JavaScript. So tell me like maybe start with the like, is this Preview.js-able component kind of logic? And then maybe we jump into like how the actual like parsing of props happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So the first thing so your question about how to detect components and stuff, I wrote a blog article about this. The idea is to use the TypeScript compiler API. So TypeScript itself is, like, most people are familiar with TypeScript through just TSC, the TypeScript compiler that takes your TypeScript and transpiles it to JavaScript. But TypeScript actually has a compiler API that lets you basically get into the internals of TypeScript. And what it provides you especially is this ability to give it a file and just look through the AST, so the abstract syntax tree of the file, and for each node in the file, you're able to ask what is the type of this. So the idea is here, when I have this const foo equals something that returns a JSX element, I can actually ask, hey, what is the return type of this node const foo? And all I'm doing is just saying, is this JSX? Is the return type JSX? If it is, then that must be a React element. If not, then it's not. That's pretty much all there is to detecting components. The second part is extracting the props, and that is a little bit more tricky. I didn't write a blog article on that, although I was considering doing that. But it's exactly the same idea, which is, again, I know that this node is a React component, right? So is it a function? If it's a function component, you need a little bit of if else to handle class components, etc. But a function component is a function where the first argument is the props. So you just ask the TypeScript compiler API, what is the type of the first parameter of this function? And that is the type of my props. So then I have the type of that. The next thing I need to do is generate a valid value for this, and that's just you need to kind of do a little bit of magic to figure out, okay, if it's an object, look through the properties for each of the properties, generate a valid value for that, and kind of recursively doing this, and that you end up with some values that seem to work.
Okay, very cool. And then, I think I kind of get it. Still pretty confident I might not be able to do this. One thing I'm curious about, like, is when you view a given component, behind the hood in VsCode, is Preview.js saying, I'm in this file, I'm just going to run it in my own Preview.js Node.js environment to figure out, got it. So it's completely local to the given component you're looking at. It's not like it needs to run the whole React component behind the hood to figure out what's going on. No. Got it.
And that's actually the third piece. So there are three pieces to Preview.js. There is detecting components, extracting props, like generating props, and actually previewing the component. And the previewing is basically just delegated to VsCode.js, which is a really, really, really powerful developer tool that kind of is Webpack on steroids, but much, much simpler as well.
Sure.
And the key here is so Preview.js runs into a separate Node server. It actually used to be well, VS Code actually runs Node, right? It's an Electron app, if I remember correctly.
Sure.
But so now Preview.js basically spins up a separate Node server that is actually the same thing as when you run Preview.js as a CLI, because Preview.js is not just an IDE extension; it's also available as a CLI.
Sure.
So it just all it does really is generate a dummy app around your component that
nice.
automatically invokes that component.
Okay, that's super cool. Nice. Okay, then the last question I have on sort of the technicals behind Preview.js is like, how do side effects in a given component work? And I don't know if the right term is side effects, but presumably if I have some complex context, or if I'm passing some state from like parent components, there are things that I can't control at a local level in any given component. So have you put any thought to that? I imagine like most visual components, Preview.js just works out of the box, but there's probably some like complex stuff. And how do you think about that complex stuff with respect to code bases you've worked on, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So let me share my screen again. There are a couple of things. First, so the first thing is that Preview.js is definitely more suited for purely visual components. But one first thing that you have is this wrapper components. So if, for example, if your component is relying on Redux being there, Redux being set up, you can actually set up this Preview.js wrapper, which will create your Redux store and set up the React context provider for it. So then whatever is rendered, so your component is rendered within that, so it will just end up having the right React context.
Nice.
But if you need some more complex setup, I think it's the same problem as when you're using Storybook. You may have to set up some kind of dummy container component that invokes your components in a way that makes it work like you want. But at that stage, I would actually question: should you maybe refactor your component to make it a little bit more independent, separating, like making a dumb component and something more stateful. A lot of times, I think it might actually influence you to make better design decisions.
Of course. Yeah, like the decoupling of what things look like and like the business logic behind things. It's kind of what you're referring to.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay, cool. This is super cool. Francois, the next, so this, tell me more about like how Preview.js has gone, like the history of it. You've been working on it for how long? How are things going?
Yeah.
What's the future looking like? All that kind of fun stuff.
So reactions on Twitter and on Reddit were very, very, very good, very positive. And like some people were like, "You don't need this. You can just spin up your dev server." And I didn't really get the reason behind it, which is just poor marketing from me. But the rest of the people seemed quite excited. And then I kind of refactored a bunch of stuff, decoupled it from React, and then released Preview.js the day after my daughter was born, because my daughter was born in early January. And I had to go home I was sent home by the hospital because turns out I had COVID. So I couldn't stay with my wife and my baby. So I had a week to stay at home without them, without anything to do. And that was the last week of good sleep that I would get in the year. So it was a good time to release Preview.js.
Nice.
So since then it's been kind of growing slowly. I released Preview.js Pro, I think, in May or June this year, and Preview.js Pro only had a couple extra features. Now it has especially the props editor that is a lot better, but I think it will really be worth paying for when the Storybook creator will be there. So you know what I mentioned earlier about save stories.
Sure.
So it's been growing slowly, and I think I have like 20,000 installs or something like that, but I think it's only a few hundred users a few hundred active users per day. Yeah.
Okay. But that's super cool. And so you said the Storybook stuff you're working on, is there any like additional like feature, like I guess from a feature perspective, but even beyond that, like platform perspective, like do you see Preview.js as always being like a CLI and the server that runs on your local dev environment?
No.
Do you have any?
No. So
tell me more about that.
One thing that I kind of think has a lot of value is, you mentioned earlier, some companies don't even have Storybook, right? And there's so many companies where it doesn't really make sense for the company to invest in creating Storybook, because their business is going so fast, and it's not the gains from having that are not obvious. So this is where Preview.js could be useful, where it could actually, for example, with a tiny bit of config, or maybe not even any config, depending on your code base, it might actually be able to create this documentation of all of your components that is completely hosted. All you have to do is just connect your GitHub repo to it. And that would be, I think, quite useful. From a documentation perspective. So it's basically like Chromatic, the company that makes Storybook, does. They do hosting of storybooks. But again, without all the effort needed to actually set that up. The other thing is a tool that does visual regression testing automatically. So when you when for example you make a PR that updates a specific UI component, again, if you use Chromatic, they will post on your PR with an updated screenshots of all of your Storybook stories. But again, if you don't have Storybook, Preview.js would be very useful there, where you can actually take screenshots of all of your components automatically. And in fact, actually, let me show you a quick demo of that, because I was literally building that yesterday. So if you have, wait, where am I? Here. Nope. TMXA. Yes. Okay. So here, so I was looking at this Hungry app. If I run the CLI with like a screenshot, so this is the prototype of screenshotting your components automatically. I haven't set up anything, and what it will do is spin up Preview.js for every single component, generating props for each of the components. And in a couple of seconds, it will have taken screenshots of all of the components. You will see it happen here. So you can see it's taking the screenshots one by one. And so you can imagine something that does this in the background. Okay, so let me just show you what that does, what that creates. I have now this directory with all of the screenshots that have been generated. So I have the button, I have the counter, the overall app, the different stories that I have configured. So it also takes screenshots of your component stories, etc., etc.
That's so cool. I feel like this is like I feel like this is almost, I mean, I hate to talk about Highlight too much, but like with like a cool thing about Highlight is that like people install it and it's free, and then they just like they'll use it 3 months later and then start to become more active.
Mm-hmm.
And just like the flexibility there is pretty powerful. And I think a lot of companies in this like B2B SaaS world are like this, right? Where you kind of jump in and start to pay whenever it's valid. GitHub's a great example. Completely free. There's companies that use this thing for like 3 years before they ended up paying or whatever, right? I feel like this could be a cool thing where I just drop this into I don't even need to drop it into my code base. I could just click a button to install it on GitHub, and you just report on screenshot regression testing or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. Start to add value like without even touching code, and then it's like a kind of a good segue into getting people active from the like documentation perspective.
Exactly.
That's super cool. Okay.
So that's cool. Going to be, I think that will be the ultimate business model for Preview.js is just having this cloud-based building stuff.
I like it. Okay. Cool. Let us know when we can try it too.
Happy to.
Cool. About it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any things you wanted to end with? Any other questions I should ask, Francois?
No.
I think this is like sounding pretty good. Okay, cool. Well, I'll just finish with some closing remarks then. But yeah, no, Francois, it was fun to chat with you, and I'm sure after listening to this, you're going to get a few more followers on the project and hopefully some more users. You'll definitely have Highlight at least beta testing this, so I'm excited for that. And let us know when you have something sort of hosted in the space of what we talked about earlier. But this was super fun as always.
Thank you
And
for having me. That was
yeah, it's
sorry,
it's
I
an
talked so
honor to
much.
have you as our first. No, not at all. It was an honor to have you as our first guest, and yeah,